What if I told you that one tank changed the course of World War II? A machine so revolutionary that when the Germans first encountered it, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. A beast of steel that struck fear into the hearts of the Wehrmacht and became a symbol of Soviet resistance. This is the story of the T-34, the tank that helped win the biggest war in human history. We're going back to 1941, to the frozen steppes of Russia, where metal met metal in the most brutal tank warfare the world has ever seen. Our story begins in the late 1930s. The Soviet Union knew war was coming. They'd watched the Germans rearm, and they knew their existing tanks wouldn't cut it. Enter Mikhail Koshkin, a brilliant Soviet tank designer given an almost impossible task: create a tank that was fast, heavily armored, and packed serious firepower, all while being simple enough to mass produce. Koshkin and his team at the Kharkov locomotive factory looked at every tank design principle and asked, what if we did it differently? The result was the T-34, and it was nothing short of revolutionary. Here's what made this tank game-changing. First, the armor. Instead of vertical plates, the T-34's armor was angled at 60 degrees. This meant shells would ricochet off instead of penetrating. The T-34's 45mm sloped armor was effectively as strong as 90mm of vertical armor. Second, those wide tracks gave it incredible mobility in mud, snow, and rough terrain. While German panzers got stuck during the Russian mud season, the T-34 just kept rolling. Third, the V2 diesel engine was fuel efficient and less likely to catch fire when hit. German tanks ran on gasoline and would explode into fireballs. The T-34 would survive impacts that turned other tanks into infernos. And that 76mm gun could punch through any German tank's armor in 1941. The Germans had nothing that could match it. June 22, 1941, 3 million German soldiers poured across the Soviet border in Operation Barbarossa. They expected an easy victory, but they were about to meet something they'd never encountered before. German tank crews fired at T-34s from 700 meters, no effect. 500 meters, nothing. The tanks kept coming. At 200 meters, their shells still bounced off harmlessly. Then the T-34's gun fired once, and that was it. One German tank commander described his first encounter. We fired at them from 700 meters, no effect. 500 meters, nothing. They kept coming. At 200 meters, our shells still bounced off. Then their gun fired once, and we were done. The Germans had a serious crisis. Their 37mm anti-tank gun was so ineffective that troops called it the door knocker. German General Ewald von Kleist was forced to write the finest tank in the world. He was talking about the enemy tank. But despite having a superior tank, the Soviets were still losing badly in 1941. Why? Training was inadequate. Communication was nearly impossible. Only the platoon leader had a radio. Soviet tactics were outdated compared to German blitzkrieg. Tank platoons would charge without support and get slaughtered. The superior tank couldn't overcome superior tactics and training. But as the war went on, Soviet crews got better. Tactics improved. Commanders learned from failures. And the factories started producing T-34s by the thousands. This is where the real genius showed. It was simple enough to mass produce even when factories were being evacuated, even when workers were under artillery fire. The Soviets understood something the Germans didn't. In total war, you don't need perfect tanks. You need tanks you can make thousands of. The Soviets produced over 84,000 T-34s during the war. To put that in perspective, the Germans produced about 6,000 Panther tanks. The T-34 wasn't just a great tank, it was a great tank they could manufacture by the thousands while fighting for survival. When German forces threatened factories in Western Russia, the Soviets did something unimaginable. They picked up entire factories and moved them east beyond the Ural Mountains. Workers, many of them women and teenagers, labored around the clock. The math was brutal, but effective. If Germany had one Tiger and the Soviets had 50 T-34s, the mathematics of attrition worked in the Soviets' favor. Eventually, the Germans would run out of Tigers. The Soviets would never run out of T-34s. By 1943, the Germans developed new tanks, forcing the Soviets to respond. The T-34/85 kept the same reliable chassis, but featured a bigger turret and an 85mm gun that could punch through heavy German armor. It had a 3-person turret that freed the commander from loading the gun manually. The T-34/85 could go toe-to-toe with almost any German tank. Most importantly, it was way more reliable. T-34s rolled from Moscow to Stalingrad to Kursk, where the largest tank battle in history took place, and finally to Berlin in 1945. They destroyed thousands of German tanks. But the T-34 story didn't end there. It fought in Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East, Africa, everywhere there was a Cold War conflict. Some were still in military service in the 1990s, more than 50 years after they were designed. Why? Because they just worked. Simple, reliable, tough. You could maintain a T-34 with basic tools. It was the AK-47 of tanks, incredibly effective and nearly indestructible. Today, T-34s stand as monuments across Russia and former Soviet states. They're symbols of victory and sacrifice. Tank collectors worldwide treasure working T-34s. Some still run, their diesel engines rumbling after 80 years. So what made the T-34 legendary? It was brilliant design balancing armor, firepower, and mobility. It was industrial achievement under impossible circumstances. It was the courage of the crews who fought in them. But more than anything, the T-34 was revolutionary because it changed how we think about tanks. It proved that simplicity and reliability could beat complexity, that sloped armor worked, that diesel engines were superior, that a tank didn't need to be perfect, it needed to be good enough, producible, and maintainable. Every modern tank owes something to the T-34. The Abrams, the Leopard, the Challenger, they all learned lessons from this Soviet beast. Sloped armor? The T-34 did it first. Diesel engines? The T-34 proved they worked. Balancing mobility and protection? The T-34 wrote the book. The T-34 wasn't just a tank. It was a revolution on tracks. It was a symbol of resilience and determination. It was a machine that changed the course of history. From the factories of Kharkov to the streets of Berlin, the legend of the T-34 lives on. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most legendary tanks, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible history content. Let me know in the comments which other legendary military vehicles you'd like me to cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.